Have you ever noticed how public transportation feels different after midnight? The fluorescent lights flicker with a rhythm that doesn't match your heartbeat. The empty seats seem to hold the impressions of passengers who shouldn't exist. And sometimes, just sometimes, you realize you're not alone with the people you can see. I learned this during my 3 years working the graveyard shift as a transit security supervisor. 3 years of monitoring late-night buses, subway cars, and train platforms. 3 years of watching security footage that captured things that couldn't be explained. 3 years of encounters that taught me that the most dangerous passengers are the ones who aren't supposed to be there. Welcome to the Night Seminium. If you love true scary stories that send shivers down your spine, you're in the right place. Tonight, I'm sharing 3 interconnected encounters from my time working transit security during the darkest hours of the night. 3 experiences that revealed to me that public transportation doesn't just move people from place to place. Sometimes it carries things that shouldn't be moving at all. Part 1. The 3:17 a.m. Express. My name is David Chen, and until recently, I worked as a night supervisor for the Metropolitan Transit Authority. My job involved monitoring security cameras, coordinating with drivers, and responding to incidents on buses and trains that ran between midnight and 6 a.m. It was quiet work most of the time, the kind of job that attracted people who preferred solitude and minimal human interaction. The Transit Authority's night operations covered 12 bus routes and 2 subway lines that served the city's most isolated neighborhoods. Hospital workers heading home from late shifts, cleaning crews traveling between office buildings, and the occasional group of college students extending their night out. The ridership was predictable, routine, and manageable. That changed in October, when I started noticing irregularities in the security footage from Route 47, the express bus that ran from downtown to the industrial district on the city's eastern edge. Route 47 operated every hour from midnight to 5 a.m., serving a corridor of warehouses, factories, and low-income housing. The passenger manifest rarely showed more than a dozen riders per trip, mostly shift workers and night custodians. The bus itself was a standard 40-foot model, equipped with 16 security cameras that provided complete coverage of the interior and exterior. The first anomaly appeared on October 15th, during the 3:17 a.m. run. I was reviewing the previous night's footage during my shift when I noticed something strange in the camera feed from seat 14B. The timestamp showed 3:31 a.m., and the bus was traveling through the warehouse district, about 10 minutes from the end of the line. According to the passenger manifest, there were 7 people on the bus at that time. I could see 6 of them clearly in the various camera angles. 2 night shift workers sleeping in the front section, a woman reading a book near the middle, an elderly man staring out the window, and 2 teenagers sharing earbuds in the back. But seat 14B showed a 7th passenger. The figure was difficult to make out clearly. The camera angle captured the seat from behind and slightly to the side so I could see the outline of someone sitting there, but not their face or specific details. They appeared to be wearing dark clothing and remained completely motionless throughout the 15-minute segment I reviewed. What made this strange was that 14B was supposed to be empty. I cross-referenced the footage with the bus driver's incident reports and the electronic passenger counter. 7 people had boarded the bus during that run, but only 6 were accounted for in the seating arrangement I could observe. I made a note in the system and moved on to other footage, assuming there was a blind spot or camera angle issue I hadn't considered. The next night, I specifically monitored Route 47's 3:17 a.m. run in real time. The bus departed downtown right on schedule with 8 passengers. I watched the live feeds as it made its way through the residential areas, the commercial district, and finally into the warehouse corridor. The passenger count remained consistent, and I could identify each rider in their respective seats. At 3:34 a.m., as the bus passed through the darkest section of the route, something changed. The camera covering seats 12 to 16 experienced what looked like interference. The image became grainy and distorted for approximately 30 seconds. When the feed cleared, there was a figure sitting in 14B. I immediately switched to the other camera angles to get a better view, but every camera that should have captured seat 14B was experiencing similar interference. The passenger count display still showed 8 riders, but I could now see 9 distinct figures on the bus. The additional passenger remained in seat 14B for the rest of the route, never moving, never turning their head, never acknowledging the other riders. When the bus reached the end of the line, the 8 documented passengers disembarked normally. The figure in 14B simply wasn't there anymore. I called the driver, Marcus Rodriguez, to ask about the trip. "Everything normal tonight," he said. 8 passengers, no incidents, on-time arrival. "Why? Did you notice anyone in seat 14B? 14B? That seat's been broken for weeks. The cushion is torn and one of the armrests is loose. Nobody ever sits there. I pulled up the maintenance records for that bus. Seat 14B had indeed been flagged for repair 3 weeks earlier due to damage from vandalism. The work order was still pending, and drivers had been instructed to place an out-of-service sign on the seat to discourage passengers from using it. But in the security footage there was no sign visible and someone was definitely sitting there. Over the next week I monitored Route 47 obsessively. The phenomenon occurred every night during the 3:17 a.m. run, always in the same location, always at approximately the same time. The figure would appear when the bus entered the warehouse district and disappear when it reached the terminal. I started documenting everything: timestamps, weather conditions, passenger counts, driver reports, and technical diagnostics for the camera systems. The pattern was consistent, but none of the other variables seemed to correlate with the appearances. On October 23, I decided to ride Route 47 myself. I boarded at the downtown terminal at 3:17 a.m., paid my fare in cash, and took a seat in the front section where I could observe the entire bus. There were 11 other passengers, a higher count than usual, but still within the normal range for a Friday night. The first part of the trip was routine. Passengers dozed, read, or stared out the windows at the passing city. The driver, Marcus Rodriguez, acknowledged me with a nod but didn't seem curious about why a transit authority supervisor was riding his route. As we entered the warehouse district, I kept my attention focused on seat 14B. The out-of-service sign was clearly visible, and the seat remained empty throughout the journey. Whatever I had been seeing in the security footage wasn't manifesting during my physical presence on the bus. I was disappointed but not entirely surprised. Paranormal phenomena, if that's what this was, often seem to avoid direct observation. When I returned to work the next night, I immediately pulled up the footage from my ride. The cameras showed everything exactly as I remembered it: 12 passengers including myself, with seat 14B clearly empty and marked out of service. But when I reviewed the footage from the following night's 3:17 a.m. run, the figure was back. This time I noticed something I had missed before. The timestamp on the camera feed from seat 14B was running approximately 30 seconds behind the timestamps on the other cameras. It was subtle, but when I synchronized the feeds manually, the discrepancy was clear. Someone was sitting in seat 14B, but they were sitting there 30 seconds in the past. I spent the rest of that shift researching temporal anomalies in security camera systems, but found nothing that explained what I was observing. Equipment malfunctions could cause timestamp errors, but they couldn't create detailed images of people who weren't there. On November 1st, I brought the footage to my supervisor, Janet Williams. "I need you to look at something," I said, queuing up a compilation of the seat 14B incidents. "This has been happening every night for 2 weeks." Janet reviewed the footage carefully, asking technical questions about the camera systems and cross-referencing the manifest data. She was thorough and skeptical, which I appreciated. "It's definitely anomalous," she concluded. "But I'm not sure what you want me to do about it. Is it affecting operations? Are passengers complaining?" "No, but..." "Then document it and move on. We have real problems to solve, David. Equipment glitches happen." I understood her position, but I couldn't dismiss what I was seeing as a simple equipment malfunction. The figure in seat 14B was too consistent, too detailed, too purposeful to be a technical error. That night, I made a decision that changed everything. I decided to try communicating with whatever was appearing in seat 14B. At 3:15 a.m. I called Marcus Rodriguez on the radio. "Marcus, this is David in dispatch. I need you to do something unusual during tonight's run." "What kind of unusual?" "When you reach the warehouse district, I want you to announce over the intercom that seat 14B is available for any passenger who needs it." "But 14B is out of service." "It's marked." "I know. Just trust me on this." Marcus was a good driver who followed instructions without asking too many questions. At 3:32 a.m., as the bus entered the warehouse district, I heard his voice over the radio making the announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, seat 14B is now available for any passenger who would like to use it." I watched the live camera feeds intently. The regular passengers showed no reaction to the announcement, which made sense since they could see the out-of-service sign. But at exactly 3:34 a.m., the familiar interference began on the cameras covering seat 14B. When the feeds cleared, the figure was there as usual. But this time something was different. The figure turned its head toward the front of the bus, toward the driver, as if acknowledging the announcement. For just a moment the camera captured a partial profile, and I saw something that made my blood run cold. The passenger in seat 14B had no face. Where features should have been, there was only smooth, dark emptiness. Not shadow, not distortion from the camera angle, but actual absence of facial structure. The figure held that position for approximately 10 seconds, then returned to its usual motionless state for the remainder of the journey. I immediately called Marcus when the bus reached the terminal. "Did you see anyone respond to your announcement about 14B? "No, nobody moved." "Why would they? The seat's clearly marked out of service." "Are you sure? Did you check your rearview mirror when you made the announcement?" "David, I've been driving this route for 8 years. I know what I see in my mirrors." Nobody responded to the announcement because nobody could use that seat. The disconnect between what I was observing in the security footage and what the driver was experiencing in real time suggested something far stranger than equipment malfunction or passenger fraud. The figure in seat 14B wasn't just appearing on camera. It was existing in a different version of reality, one that overlapped with our normal world but operated according to different rules. Part 2: The Platform Dweller. The Route 47 incidents led me to start reviewing security footage from other parts of the transit system more carefully. If temporal anomalies were occurring on the buses, there might be similar phenomena elsewhere in the network. I focused on the subway system, specifically the blue line that connected the University District to the airport. The blue line operated limited service during overnight hours, with trains running every 90 minutes between midnight and 6 a.m. The line had 12 stations, most of which were completely unstaffed during night hours. Security was provided by automated systems and periodic patrols by transit police, but the platforms were essentially empty for hours at a time. On November 8, I discovered that one of those platforms wasn't as empty as it should have been. Riverside Station was the 8th stop on the Blue Line, serving a mixed residential and commercial area that was largely deserted after business hours. The platform was long and narrow, built in the 1970s with a utilitarian design that prioritized function over aesthetics. Fluorescent lighting provided harsh, even illumination, and security cameras covered every angle. During my review of the previous week's footage, I noticed a recurring figure on the Riverside platform. Every night, at approximately 2:45 a.m., someone would appear at the far end of the platform, near the emergency exit. They would stand motionless in the same position until approximately 4:15 a.m., then disappear. The figure never moved during their 90-minute presence. They never boarded trains, never used the station facilities, never interacted with the occasional passenger who passed through. They simply stood and waited. What made this particularly strange was that the emergency exit they stood near was locked and alarmed. There was no way for someone to enter or leave the station through that door without triggering security alerts. I pulled up the access logs for Riverside Station, looking for any record of someone entering through the main entrance and walking to the emergency exit. According to the turnstile data, no one had accessed the platform during the times when the figure was visible. The figure was appearing on the platform without entering through any monitored access point. On November 10th, I decided to observe Riverside Station in real time during the overnight hours. I set up multiple monitor feeds in my control room, covering every camera angle of the platform. At 2:30 a.m. the station was completely empty. The last train had departed at 2:15 a.m., and the next wasn't scheduled until 3:45 a.m. At exactly 2:45 a.m., the figure appeared. One moment, the far end of the platform was empty. The next moment, someone was standing there as if they had materialized from thin air. I immediately checked the other camera angles, looking for evidence of how they had arrived. The emergency exit remained closed and undisturbed. The main entrance showed no activity. The figure had simply appeared in position without any visible means of arrival. I zoomed in using the closest camera to get a better look at the figure. They appeared to be wearing a long coat or jacket, dark-colored, with their back turned toward the camera. I couldn't see their face or any identifying features, but their posture suggested they were alert and watchful. For the next 90 minutes, I observed the figure standing in perfect stillness. They didn't shift their weight, adjust their clothing, or react to the 2 trains that stopped at the station during that period. When passengers disembarked and walked past them, they showed no awareness of the figure's presence. At 4:15 a.m., the figure disappeared as abruptly as they had appeared. One frame showed them standing there, the next frame showed an empty platform. I immediately dispatched a transit police unit to check Riverside Station physically. Officer Sarah Kim arrived within 20 minutes and conducted a thorough search of the platform, the emergency exit, and the surrounding area. "Nothing unusual here," she reported. "The emergency exit is secure, the platform is empty, and I don't see any signs of unauthorized access." "Check the emergency exit carefully," I said. Look for any indication that it's been opened recently. I'm looking at it right now. The paint around the frame is undisturbed, the alarm system shows no faults, and the external handle shows no signs of use. This door hasn't been opened. Over the following nights, I continued monitoring Riverside Station. The pattern remained consistent. The figure would appear at 2:45 a.m. and disappear at 4:15 a.m., always in the same location, always motionless. I started documenting the passengers who used the station during those hours, looking for anyone who might be playing an elaborate prank or testing security systems. But the passenger counts never included the figure I was observing. According to all official records, the platform was empty during their appearances. On November 15th, I decided to try the same communication approach I had used with the Route 47 phenomenon. At 3 a.m., 15 minutes after the figure appeared, I activated the public address system for Riverside Station. "Attention platform visitor," I announced. "This is transit control. Please identify yourself and explain your presence at this location." I watched the camera feeds carefully for any reaction. The figure remained motionless for several seconds, then slowly began to turn around. What I saw when they faced the camera made me immediately regret trying to communicate. The figure had the general shape and proportions of a human being, but their face was wrong in a way that defied description. The features were there, but they were arranged incorrectly, as if someone had tried to recreate a human face from memory and gotten the details confused. Eyes that were too large and positioned too far apart. A mouth that was too wide and curved upward at an impossible angle. Skin that appeared to have a waxy, artificial texture. The figure stared directly into the camera for approximately 30 seconds, then turned back to their original position and remained motionless for the rest of their usual appearance time. I spent the remainder of that shift trying to rationalize what I had seen. Prosthetic makeup, digital manipulation of the camera feed, or some kind of optical illusion created by the lighting and camera angle. But none of these explanations felt adequate. The next night, I brought the footage to the attention of Dr. Michael Torres, a psychology professor at the local university who consulted with the transit authority on passenger behavior issues. "I need you to look at something," I said, showing him the recording of the figure turning toward the camera. "Tell me what you see." Dr. Torres watched the footage several times, adjusting the brightness and contrast to get a clearer view. "This is very unusual," he said finally. "The facial features don't conform to normal human proportions. It looks like someone wearing a mask or prosthetic, but the movement seems too natural for that. What about the behavior pattern? Standing motionless for 90 minutes every night in the same location? That's consistent with certain types of psychological disorders, but the logistics don't make sense. How is this person accessing a secure platform without triggering any security systems? That's what I'm trying to figure out." Dr. Torres recommended involving the transit police in a more formal investigation, but I was reluctant to escalate the situation without more concrete evidence. Supernatural phenomena didn't fit within the scope of normal police procedures. Instead, I decided to conduct one more direct observation, this time positioning myself at Riverside Station during the figure's appearance time. On November 18th, I arrived at Riverside Station at 2:30 a.m. and positioned myself in the station manager's office, which had a direct view of the platform through a one-way mirror. At 2:45 a.m., I watched the figure appear exactly as they had in the security footage. One moment the platform was empty, the next moment they were standing at the far end, near the emergency exit. Seeing the phenomenon with my own eyes confirmed that it wasn't a camera malfunction or digital artifact. Someone was actually standing on that platform, despite having no apparent means of arriving there. I observed them for an hour, taking detailed notes about their appearance and behavior. They remained perfectly motionless, showing no signs of breathing, fatigue, or awareness of their surroundings. When the 3:45 a.m. train arrived, the handful of passengers who disembarked walked past the figure without acknowledging their presence. At 4 a.m., I decided to confront the figure directly. I left the station office and walked onto the platform, approaching the figure slowly and deliberately. As I got closer, I could see that their clothing appeared to be from an earlier era, possibly the 1970s or 1980s, with a style that matched the station's original construction period. When I was approximately 10 feet away, I called out to them. "Excuse me. This is a restricted area. Can you please explain what you're doing here?" The figure turned toward me and I got my first clear, direct view of their face. It was human but wrong. The proportions were subtly off, as if someone had tried to reconstruct a face from a faded photograph. The eyes were too reflective, like glass marbles. The skin had a waxy quality that suggested it wasn't quite real. "I'm waiting for my train," they said in a voice that sounded like it was coming from a distant radio station. "What train are you waiting for?" "The 4:20 to Central Terminal." I checked my schedule. There was no 4:20 train to Central Terminal. The blue line didn't even go to Central Terminal, which was on a different line entirely. "Sir, I think you're confused about the schedule. The next train doesn't arrive until..." The figure interrupted me. "I've been waiting here every night for 37 years. My train is always late, but it will come eventually." 37 years. Riverside Station had opened in 1986, which was exactly 37 years ago. "What's your name?" I asked. "Robert Chen. I work at the accounting firm downtown. I take the 4:20 train home every night after the late shift." Robert Chen. I made a mental note to research that name when I returned to the office. "Robert, I need to tell you something. It's 2023. The train schedule has changed significantly since 1986. He looked at me with those glass marble eyes, and for a moment, his face flickered like a bad television signal. "That's impossible," he said. "I just left work an hour ago. I do this every night." At exactly 4:15 a.m., Robert Chen disappeared. Not gradually, not by walking away, but instantly, as if he had never been there. I spent the rest of that shift researching Robert Chen. What I found confirmed my growing suspicion that I was dealing with something far stranger than equipment malfunctions or elaborate pranks. Robert Chen had indeed worked at an accounting firm downtown in 1986. According to newspaper archives, he had died in a subway accident on November 18, 1986, exactly 37 years ago to the day. He had fallen onto the tracks at Central Terminal while waiting for his regular train home. The article mentioned that Robert had been working late shifts for several months before his death, regularly taking the last train of the night. His family said he had been tired and disoriented in the weeks leading up to the accident, often confused about train schedules and destinations. Robert Chen had been waiting for his train home for 37 years, unaware that he was dead, unaware that the station he waited at wasn't even the right one. Part 3. The Midnight Express Connection. The discoveries at Riverside Station led me to investigate historical records for the entire transit system, looking for patterns of accidents, deaths, and unexplained phenomena that might explain what I was experiencing. What I found was a network of interconnected anomalies that suggested the overnight transit system was harboring multiple displaced souls, all unaware of their true situation. The Route 47 bus line had been the site of 3 fatal accidents since its establishment in 1994. A passenger named Margaret Foster had died of a heart attack in seat 14B during a late-night run in 2003. The bus had been delayed for 20 minutes in the same warehouse district where I had been observing the faceless figure. The Blue Line subway system had a more extensive history of incidents. 17 people had died in accidents or medical emergencies on Blue Line trains or platforms since the line opened in 1986. Several of these deaths had occurred during overnight hours, and most involved passengers who were traveling alone. But the most significant discovery came when I cross-referenced the schedules and routes of all the anomalous phenomena I had documented. The Route 47 bus passed within 2 blocks of Riverside Station every night. The timing of the figure's appearance in seat 14B corresponded almost exactly with the arrival of the bus near the station. Robert Chen's waiting period on the platform coincided with the bus route schedule through the warehouse district. They were all connected. The displaced passengers were following the same routes they had traveled when they were alive, but their presence was fragmented across different vehicles and locations within the transit system. On November 22, I decided to map the entire phenomenon by monitoring all overnight routes simultaneously. I set up a command center in the main dispatch office with feeds from every security camera in the system. Bus routes, subway lines, and station platforms were all visible on a wall of monitors that let me observe the entire overnight network in real time. What I discovered was a ghost transportation system operating parallel to the real one. At 12:30 a.m., a figure appeared on the Red Line platform at University Station. They stood motionless for 15 minutes, then disappeared, only to reappear on a Route 23 bus at 12:45 a.m. At 1:15 a.m., a different figure boarded a Route 8 bus downtown, rode for 30 minutes, then vanished from their seat, only to appear on the Green Line platform at Medical Center Station. At 2 a.m., 3 figures were visible simultaneously. One on a bus, one on a train, and one waiting on a platform. They followed complex routes that crisscrossed the city but never seemed to reach their intended destinations. The pattern continued throughout the night, with different figures appearing and disappearing at regular intervals, all of them following routes that made no logical sense within the current transit system but might have been accurate decades earlier. I started documenting each figure's apparent route and timing, creating a map of their journeys. What emerged was a transportation network from the past, overlaid on the present system like a temporal double exposure. Bus routes that had been discontinued, train schedules that had been changed, and station configurations that had been renovated were all reflected in the movements of the displaced passengers. They were traveling on a version of the transit system that no longer existed. On November 25th, I made a decision that violated every protocol in the Transit Authority handbook. I decided to try riding the Ghost Network. At 11:45 p.m., I positioned myself at the downtown terminal where several of the anomalous routes converged. According to my observations, a figure typically appeared on the Route 15 bus at midnight, riding eastbound toward the industrial district. Route 15 had been discontinued in 2019, but the buses still followed the old route during certain overnight runs to maintain service coverage. If my theory was correct, I might be able to board the same bus as one of the displaced passengers. At exactly midnight, I boarded the eastbound Route 15 bus. There were 7 other passengers, all apparently normal late-night commuters. I took a seat in the middle section and waited to see what would happen. As the bus entered the industrial district, I felt a distinct change in the atmosphere. The air became colder, and the fluorescent lighting seemed to flicker with a rhythm that didn't match the bus's movement. The other passengers appeared to become drowsy, several of them nodding off despite having been alert moments earlier. At 12:23 a.m., a figure appeared in the seat directly across from me. Unlike the other displaced passengers I had observed, this one was clearly visible and well-defined. A woman in her 40s, wearing a business suit from the early 2000s, carrying a briefcase and a coffee cup that seemed to never empty. She looked directly at me and smiled. "Running late tonight?" she asked as if we were old acquaintances. "Yes," I replied carefully. Traffic was heavy downtown. It always is on Friday nights. I keep telling my supervisor that the late shift schedule needs adjustment, but management never listens to the night workers. I glanced around the bus. The other passengers were all asleep now, despite the fact that the route was only 20 minutes old. We appeared to be alone with the displaced passenger. "What's your name?" I asked. "Linda Washington. I work in data processing for the county hospital. I take this bus home every night after the 11 p.m. shift." Linda Washington. I made a mental note to research that name, though I suspected I already knew what I would find. "How long have you been taking this route?" "About 6 months now. Ever since they moved me to the night shift. It's not ideal, but the pay differential makes it worthwhile." The bus was traveling through neighborhoods I recognized, but the view outside the windows didn't match what I expected to see. Buildings that had been demolished years ago were visible and well-lit. Storefronts that had been closed for decades showed signs of active business. Street layouts that had been reconfigured during urban renewal projects appeared in their original configurations. We were traveling through a version of the city that existed in the past. "Linda, what year is it?" She looked at me with concern. "Are you feeling all right?" "It's 2004. November 25th, 2004. You seem confused." "I'm fine. Just tired." "I understand. Night shift work can be disorienting. Sometimes I feel like I'm living in a different world from everyone else." The bus continued its route through the temporal cityscape. I tried to take notes on my phone, but the device wouldn't turn on. Digital technology appeared to be incompatible with whatever reality I was experiencing. "Where do you get off?" Linda asked. "I'm not sure. This is my first time taking this route." "Oh, you should stay on until the end of the line. The terminal has great coffee, and the waiting area is much more comfortable than these seats." "How long until we reach the terminal?" "About 40 minutes. But don't worry about the time. Night shift schedules are flexible. As long as you get where you're going eventually, that's what matters." I rode with Linda for the full 40 minutes, listening to her talk about her work, her family, and her plans for the weekend. She was engaging and friendly, with no apparent awareness that anything unusual was happening. When the bus reached the terminal, Linda gathered her belongings and stood to disembark. "It was nice talking with you," she said. "Maybe I'll see you on Monday night's run." "Maybe," I agreed. Linda walked to the front of the bus and stepped off. I watched through the window as she crossed the terminal toward what appeared to be a connection point for other routes. The moment she was out of sight, the terminal changed. The modern, well-lit facility I had been looking at transformed into the rundown, minimally maintained building I knew from my normal work duties. The other passengers on the bus woke up, looking around in confusion as if they weren't sure how they had gotten there. I checked my phone. It was now working normally, and the time showed 1:03 a.m. According to the timestamp, I had been on the bus for only 3 minutes, not the 40 minutes I had experienced while talking with Linda. When I returned to work the next night, I researched Linda Washington. As I expected, she had died in 2004, killed in a car accident while driving home from her night shift at the county hospital. The accident had occurred on November 25, exactly 19 years ago to the day. Linda had been taking Route 15 home from work when the accident happened. She had been found in her car at 1:03 a.m., apparently having fallen asleep at the wheel after her late shift. She was still taking that bus ride home 19 years later, unaware that she had never made it to her destination. The pattern was becoming clear. The displaced passengers were all people who had died while traveling on public transportation or immediately after using it. They continued following their familiar routes, unaware that their journeys had been permanently interrupted. But what I had discovered during my ride with Linda suggested something more complex than simple residual haunting. The temporal displacement was creating a parallel transportation network where the deceased could interact with living passengers under certain conditions. On November 28, I decided to attempt a more ambitious experiment. I would try to ride multiple routes in sequence, following the pattern I had observed in the security footage, to see if I could map the entire ghost network. Starting at midnight, I began a journey that would take me through 6 different routes over the course of 5 hours. Bus to subway to bus to train, following the connection points where displaced passengers transferred between vehicles. Each leg of the journey brought me into contact with different temporal fragments of the city. I saw buildings that had been demolished, businesses that had closed, and street configurations that had been changed by urban development projects. I met passengers from different eras, all unaware that they were traveling through a city that no longer existed. A college student from 1995 who was heading home after a late night at the library. A factory worker from 1987 who was traveling to the morning shift. A nurse from 2010 who was commuting between hospital assignments. All of them were friendly and conversational, treating me as a fellow night shift worker who understood the challenges of moving through the city during the dark hours. None of them showed any awareness that they were dead or that decades had passed since their last living journey. By 5 a.m., when I completed the circuit and returned to the downtown terminal, I had documented 12 different displaced passengers and traced their routes through a complex network of interdimensional transportation. The ghost network was vast, covering the entire city, and it operated every night with the precision of a well-managed transit system. The displaced passengers were commuting between destinations that no longer existed, following schedules that had been obsolete for years or decades. But they were also serving a function I hadn't expected. They were maintaining the memory of the city's transportation history, preserving routes and connections that would otherwise be forgotten. When I filed my final report on the phenomena, I focused on the operational implications rather than the supernatural aspects. Equipment monitoring procedures needed to be updated to account for temporal anomalies in the security systems. Driver training needed to include protocols for handling passenger incidents that might involve displaced individuals. And passenger safety procedures needed to address the possibility of interactions with people who weren't entirely present in current reality. My supervisor, Janet Williams, read the report with her usual skeptical thoroughness. "This is interesting work, David, but I'm not sure how to implement your recommendations. Are you suggesting that we train our drivers to communicate with dead passengers?" "I'm suggesting that we acknowledge the reality of what's happening in our system and develop appropriate responses." "And what reality is that?" "That public transportation creates emotional connections strong enough to persist beyond death. That our network is serving passengers from multiple time periods simultaneously. And that the overnight shift is staffed not just by the living, but by the displaced souls who refuse to abandon their familiar routes." Janet set down the report and looked at me carefully. "David, I think you need some time off. This job can be isolating, and working overnight shifts for extended periods can affect your perception of reality. You think I'm having hallucinations? I think you're a dedicated employee who has been working under stressful conditions for too long. Take a vacation. Get some rest. When you come back, we'll discuss transferring you to day shift operations." I understood her position, but I also knew that my discoveries were too important to dismiss as stress-induced delusions. The ghost network was real, and it was operating every night in the transit system I was responsible for monitoring. Part 4. The Conductor's Revelation. Rather than take the vacation Janet suggested, I decided to conduct one final investigation that would either prove my theories or demonstrate conclusively that I was experiencing some form of psychological breakdown. I needed to find someone else who had observed the phenomena, someone whose testimony could corroborate my experiences. I started by interviewing every driver, conductor, and maintenance worker who had worked overnight shifts for more than 5 years. Most were reluctant to discuss unusual experiences, citing concerns about job security and professional reputation. But gradually, a pattern of stories emerged. Marcus Rodriguez, the Route 47 driver, admitted that he had been avoiding looking at seat 14B for months because something about that area makes me uncomfortable. He couldn't explain why, but he had developed a habit of keeping his attention focused on the road ahead rather than checking his rearview mirror when passing through the warehouse district. Sarah Chin, a Blue Line conductor, mentioned that she often heard conversations coming from empty train cars during late-night runs. Passengers talking about events that happened decades ago, discussing places that don't exist anymore. I always assumed it was radio interference or echoes from other parts of the system. James Morrison, a maintenance supervisor who worked overnight platform cleaning, reported finding personal items that didn't belong to documented passengers. Briefcases from the 1980s, newspapers with dates from years past, coffee cups that are still warm but have been sitting on benches for hours. The most revealing interview came from Eleanor Vasquez, a veteran conductor who had been working the overnight shift on various routes for 23 years. "I've seen them," she said simply when I asked about unusual passenger behavior. "The ones who don't quite belong. They board trains that don't match their tickets, they ask about destinations that aren't on our routes, and they never seem to age despite riding the same trains for years." "How long have you been aware of this?" "Since my second year on the job. At first, I thought they were just confused passengers or people with mental health issues. But then I started recognizing individuals who appeared night after night, year after year, never changing, never reaching their destinations." "Have you ever tried talking to them?" "Once. There was a woman who rode the Green Line every Tuesday night, always got off at Medical Center Station, always carried the same purse and wore the same coat. After seeing her for 6 months, I asked her where she was going. What did she say? She told me she was visiting her daughter in the hospital, that her daughter had been in a car accident and was in critical condition. She seemed genuinely worried and kept checking her watch, afraid she would miss visiting hours." "Did you follow up?" "I checked with the hospital. No one matching her description had been admitted in the past year. But when I looked deeper into the records, I found that a woman with the same name had been a patient there in 1998. She had died from complications following surgery. The passenger was visiting her own hospital room? That's what I think. She was reliving the last journey she made while alive, trying to get back to the hospital where she died." Eleanor's testimony confirmed that the phenomena I had observed were part of a larger pattern that had been occurring for decades. The overnight transit system was serving as a bridge between past and present, allowing displaced souls to continue their familiar routines indefinitely. But Eleanor also told me something that changed my understanding of the entire situation. "There's something else you should know," she said. "The phenomena are getting stronger. More frequent, more visible, more interactive. When I started this job, I might see one displaced passenger per month. Now I encounter them almost every night. Why do you think that's happening? I think the system is reaching some kind of saturation point. Too many souls anchored to the same network, all trying to complete journeys that can never be finished. The boundary between their reality and ours is wearing thin. What do you think will happen if it continues? I think eventually the ghost network will become visible to all passengers, not just those of us who work overnight shifts. And when that happens, the living and the dead will be sharing the same vehicles, traveling to destinations that exist in different time periods." Eleanor's prediction was troubling, but it also provided me with a new research direction. If the phenomena were intensifying, there should be measurable changes in the frequency and visibility of the displaced passengers. I spent the next week compiling data from security footage going back 5 years, counting anomalous appearances and tracking their distribution across the transit network. What I found confirmed Eleanor's observation. In 2018, I documented an average of 12 anomalous passenger appearances per month across the entire system. By 2023, that number had increased to 47 per month. The rate of increase was accelerating, with November 2023 showing 63 documented appearances. More concerning was the change in the quality of the phenomena. Early appearances were brief and barely visible, requiring careful analysis of security footage to detect. Recent appearances were longer, clearer, and increasingly interactive with the physical environment. The displaced passengers were becoming more real. On December 5th, I received a call that confirmed my worst fears about the direction of the phenomena. David, this is Marcus Rodriguez. I need to report an incident from last night's Route 47 run. What happened? A passenger tried to board the bus using a ticket from 2003. When I told her the ticket wasn't valid, she became confused and agitated. She insisted that she had purchased it that evening and demanded to know why the fare had increased so dramatically. Did you get her name? Margaret Foster. She said she worked downtown and took this route home every night. When I explained that it was 2023, not 2003, she accused me of playing a cruel joke. Margaret Foster. The passenger who had died of a heart attack in seat 14B 20 years earlier. What happened next? She boarded anyway despite not having valid fare. I didn't want to create a scene, so I let it go. But David, here's the strange part. The other passengers could see her too. They were staring at her clothing, whispering about how she looked like she was from a different era. Where did she sit? 14B. And David, when she sat down, the out-of-service sign just disappeared. Like it was never there. How long did she stay on the bus? The full route. But when we reached the terminal, she didn't get off. She just sat there, looking confused, asking when her stop was coming up. I had to call transit police to help her off the bus. What did the police report say? That's the weird part. When Officer Kim arrived, the woman was gone. The police report says they found no evidence of anyone matching the description I provided. Margaret Foster had manifested physically enough to be seen by multiple passengers and to interact with the bus environment, but she had vanished when confronted by authority figures who weren't part of the transit system. The ghost network was becoming substantial enough to affect the real world. Over the following days, I received similar reports from other drivers and conductors. Displaced passengers were appearing with increasing frequency and visibility, often confusing and frightening regular passengers who weren't prepared for encounters with people from different time periods. On December 8, the situation escalated beyond individual passenger incidents. I was monitoring the overnight system when every security camera in the network began showing temporal anomalies simultaneously. Buses and trains throughout the city were carrying passengers from multiple eras, all visible on the same vehicles, all following routes that existed in different versions of the transportation system. The downtown terminal showed the most dramatic manifestation. The waiting area contained passengers from the 1980s, 1990s, 2000s and 2010s, all occupying the same space but apparently unaware of each other's presence. They were reading newspapers with different dates, wearing clothing from different decades, and discussing events from their respective time periods. But they were also beginning to notice discrepancies in their environments. Passengers from earlier eras were confused by digital displays and modern bus designs. Recent passengers were disoriented by the presence of discontinued routes and obsolete fare systems. The two realities were colliding, and the displaced passengers were becoming aware that something was wrong with their familiar routines. At 3:17 a.m., I received a call that forced me to make a decision I had been avoiding. David, this is Eleanor Vasquez. I'm at Union Station and I need immediate assistance. The entire Green Line platform is filled with passengers from different time periods, and they're all trying to board the same train. How many passengers? At least 40. They're arguing about fare prices, schedules, and destinations. Some of them are trying to use tickets from the 1990s, others are looking for routes that were discontinued years ago. The regular passengers are terrified. Are the displaced passengers visible to everyone? Yes. Whatever barrier was keeping them separate from normal reality has broken down. Everyone can see them now. I made a decision that violated every protocol in the Transit Authority handbook. Instead of calling for backup or reporting the situation to my supervisors, I left my post and drove directly to Union Station. When I arrived, I found a scene that defied rational explanation. The platform was crowded with passengers from across 4 decades, all trying to use a transportation system that existed differently in their respective time periods. But they weren't chaotic or threatening. They were simply confused, trying to navigate a familiar system that no longer matched their expectations. I approached Eleanor, who was standing near the platform entrance looking overwhelmed. How long has this been going on? About an hour. It started gradually with just a few displaced passengers appearing. But then more and more began manifesting, until the platform was completely crowded. Are they interacting with each other? Not really. They seem to exist in overlapping but separate realities. A passenger from 1995 will walk right through someone from 2010 without either of them noticing. I observed the crowd more carefully and realized Eleanor was right. The displaced passengers occupied the same physical space but operated according to different versions of reality. They were experiencing the platform as it existed during their respective time periods. Eleanor, I need you to help me with something. I think there's a way to guide them back to their proper routes. What do you mean? They're all trying to complete journeys that were interrupted by their deaths. If we can help them understand what happened and show them how to finish their trips, they might be able to move on instead of remaining trapped in the transit system. Over the next 2 hours, Eleanor and I worked together to communicate with the displaced passengers. We explained gently that they had died during or shortly after their travels, that years or decades had passed since their intended journeys, and that they were now free to choose whether to continue their endless routes or move on to whatever came next. Most of the passengers accepted the information with surprising calm. Death, when explained compassionately, was less frightening than the confusion they had been experiencing about the changes in their familiar transportation system. One by one they began to fade from the platform, not disappearing but transitioning to something beyond physical reality. They thanked us for helping them understand their situation and expressed relief at finally being able to complete their interrupted journeys. By dawn, the platform was empty except for the handful of regular passengers who had witnessed the entire event. Part 5. The Network's Purpose. The mass manifestation at Union Station marked the end of the ghost network as I had known it, but it also revealed something profound about the nature of public transportation and human consciousness. Over the following weeks, as I compiled my final reports and prepared to leave my position with the Transit Authority, I came to understand that what I had been observing wasn't a supernatural infestation of the transportation system. It was evidence of something much more significant. Public transportation creates emotional connections that transcend physical existence. The routes we travel regularly, the vehicles we depend on, and the destinations we associate with home, work, and family become anchored in our consciousness so deeply that even death cannot sever those connections. The displaced passengers weren't trapped in the transit system by malevolent forces or unfinished business in the traditional ghostly sense. They were maintaining their connection to the living world through the one constant that had defined their daily existence: their commute. For Margaret Foster, the 3:17 a.m. Route 47 bus represented her last normal moment before the heart attack that killed her. By continuing to ride that route, she was preserving her connection to the life she had been living. For Robert Chen, waiting on the Riverside platform was his way of maintaining his identity as a working professional who took responsibility for getting home safely every night. For Linda Washington and the dozens of other displaced passengers, the transit system provided continuity and purpose in an existence that would otherwise be formless and frightening. But the ghost network served a function for the living as well. The overnight transit workers who encountered displaced passengers reported feeling less isolated and more connected to the history of the system they served. Knowing that people from past decades were still riding the same routes created a sense of continuity and shared purpose that enhanced job satisfaction and reduced turnover. Regular passengers who experienced encounters with displaced souls often described feeling more appreciative of their own journeys and more aware of the human stories behind the anonymous faces they saw on public transportation. The transit system itself seemed to benefit from the presence of displaced passengers. Routes that carried ghost riders experienced fewer mechanical problems and required less maintenance than comparable routes that served only living passengers. The ghost network was symbiotic, providing comfort and continuity to the displaced souls while enhancing the experience and reliability of transportation for the living. My investigation had revealed that consciousness and public transportation were connected in ways that urban planners and transit authorities had never considered. The systems we built to move people through cities also moved memories, emotions, and identities through time. When I submitted my final report to Janet Williams, I focused on the practical implications of my discoveries rather than their supernatural aspects. The overnight transit system serves a dual purpose, I wrote. It provides transportation services to living passengers, but it also provides continuity services to displaced consciousness entities who maintain emotional connections to specific routes and vehicles. These entities are not disruptive or dangerous. They are the memories of people who found meaning and identity in their daily commutes. Their continued presence enhances the emotional resonance of the transportation system for all users. I recommend that the Transit Authority acknowledge this phenomenon and develop protocols that support both living passengers and displaced entities. This includes training staff to recognize and communicate with displaced passengers, establishing procedures for helping lost souls complete their interrupted journeys, and maintaining historical route information that allows displaced entities to navigate the modern system. Janet read the report with her usual skepticism, but she also seemed to understand that I was describing something important, even if she couldn't accept all of my conclusions. "David, this is fascinating work," but I'm not sure how to present it to the board of directors. Are you really asking us to officially recognize the existence of ghost passengers? I'm asking you to recognize that public transportation creates emotional connections that persist beyond physical death, and that those connections can be channeled in ways that benefit both the living and the displaced. And you believe this will improve our operations? I believe it will help us understand that we're not just moving bodies from point A to point B. We're moving stories, memories, and identities through a network that connects past, present, and future. 6 months later, the Transit Authority implemented several of my recommendations, though they were careful not to explicitly acknowledge the supernatural aspects of the phenomena. Driver training now includes modules on communicating with confused or disoriented passengers, particularly those who seem to be experiencing temporal displacement. Staff are taught to respond with patience and compassion to riders who reference obsolete schedules or discontinued routes. The Transit Authority also established a historical archive that documents changes in routes, schedules, and fare structures over the decades. This information helps current passengers understand the evolution of the system while providing displaced entities with the context they need to navigate the modern network. Most importantly, the authority adopted a policy of treating all passengers, regardless of their apparent temporal origin, with dignity and respect. This has created a more inclusive and compassionate transportation environment that serves both living and displaced riders. I left my position with the Transit Authority in March 2024, but I continue to monitor the overnight system as an independent researcher. The phenomena continue, but they have become more manageable and less disruptive to regular operations. Displaced passengers still appear on buses and trains throughout the city, but they now receive assistance from trained staff who help them understand their situation and choose whether to continue their eternal commutes or move on to whatever comes next. The ghost network has evolved from a hidden supernatural phenomenon into an acknowledged aspect of urban transportation that enriches the experience for everyone involved. As I finish this account of my experiences with the supernatural aspects of public transportation, I want to share some observations that might be helpful for others who work in similar systems or who encounter displaced passengers during their own travels. The first thing to understand is that displaced passengers are not malevolent or dangerous. They are people who found such meaning and identity in their daily commutes that death could not sever their connection to their familiar routes. They continue riding public transportation because it represents the last link to their living identities. If you encounter someone who seems confused about schedules, routes, or fare systems, consider the possibility that they might be experiencing temporal displacement. Respond with patience and kindness, as you would with any traveler who needs assistance navigating an unfamiliar system. If you work in public transportation, be aware that your system carries more than just living passengers. The routes you serve and the vehicles you operate connect multiple time periods and provide continuity for souls who refuse to abandon their familiar journeys. Pay attention to recurring phenomena that seem to involve the same individuals appearing at regular intervals. Document these observations, but approach them with respect rather than fear. Displaced passengers are not problems to be solved but people to be understood. Most importantly, remember that public transportation is more than just a practical service. It is a network of human connections that transcends the boundaries of life and death. Every route tells stories, every vehicle carries memories, and every journey connects us to the countless travelers who have taken the same paths before us. The overnight hours reveal this hidden dimension of public transportation most clearly. Between midnight and dawn, when the barriers between realities are thinnest, you might encounter passengers from other eras who are still completing journeys that began decades ago. If you do, consider yourself privileged to witness the persistence of human consciousness and the power of routine to create meaning that survives even death itself. The Ghost Network operates every night in cities around the world, carrying displaced souls who refuse to abandon their familiar routes. It is a testament to the human need for connection, purpose, and home, even in the face of the ultimate displacement. Whether you encounter it as a passenger, a transit worker, or simply someone who travels the city's dark corridors during the quiet hours, remember that you are part of a transportation system that serves both the living and the dead, both the present and the past. We are all passengers on routes that extend beyond our physical existence, traveling toward destinations that may be more about the journey than the arrival. The next time you board a late-night bus or train, look around at your fellow passengers. Some of them might be traveling routes that no longer officially exist, carrying tickets from decades past, heading to destinations that exist only in memory. They are not lost. They are exactly where they need to be, continuing journeys that death could not interrupt, maintaining connections that time could not sever. And perhaps, if you pay close attention during those quiet moments between stations, You might hear them talking about their lives, their work, their families, and their hopes for reaching home safely, just as they have every night for years or decades past. The ghost network is real, and it is eternal, and it welcomes all passengers who understand that some journeys are too important to end. So those are my 3 encounters with the supernatural side of public transportation. 3 discoveries that changed how I see the late-night buses and trains that move through our cities during the darkest hours. Now I have to ask you, fellow night travelers, have you ever felt like you weren't alone on an empty bus or train? Have you ever encountered passengers who seemed out of place, wearing clothing from another era or discussing events from decades past? Have you ever heard conversations in empty train cars or seen figures in seats that should be vacant? Maybe you've experienced that strange feeling when boarding late-night transportation, the sensation that you're entering a space where time moves differently. The way fluorescent lights flicker in patterns that don't match the vehicle's movement. The sound of voices from the past echoing through empty stations. The glimpse of faces in windows that reflect people who aren't really there. Think about your own commutes, especially during overnight hours. Have you ever met the same passenger multiple times over months or years? Someone who never seems to age or change, who always travels the same route at the same time? Have you ever tried to help someone who seemed confused about schedules or destinations, only to discover that the routes they're asking about were discontinued long ago? Perhaps you work in public transportation yourself. If so, you might have noticed equipment malfunctions that follow patterns, security cameras that capture images of passengers who don't appear on manifest lists, or vehicles that feel different during certain runs, as if they're carrying more than just the visible passengers. These could be signs that you're working within a network that serves both the living and the displaced, both current travelers and souls who refuse to abandon their familiar routes. I want to hear from you. Share your experiences in the comments below. Tell me about the strange encounters you've had on buses, trains, and subway platforms during the quiet hours. Let me know about the passengers who seem to exist in different time periods, the conversations you've overheard about events from decades past, the familiar faces that appear night after night without ever reaching their destinations. Have you ever felt like public transportation was carrying you through more than just physical space? Have you ever sensed that your regular commute connects you to the countless travelers who have taken the same routes before you? Tell me about the moments when you realized that the vehicle you were riding carried stories and memories that extended far beyond your own journey. If you're currently experiencing any of these phenomena, document them. Pay attention to the patterns, the timing, the specific locations where unusual encounters occur. You might be witnessing the ghost network that operates parallel to our normal transportation systems. And if you're enjoying these true stories from the intersection of urban life and supernatural reality, please subscribe to the Night Siminium. Hit that like button if these accounts of displaced passengers send chills down your spine. Share this video with anyone who's ever wondered about the strange encounters that happen during late-night travels. Your engagement helps me reach others who might be experiencing their own supernatural commutes. People who work overnight shifts in transportation systems, travelers who encounter passengers from other eras, and anyone who's ever felt like their familiar routes carry more than just physical passengers. Remember, public transportation connects us not just to destinations, but to the history of every journey that came before us. Sometimes the most meaningful encounters happen with passengers who are traveling routes that exist outside normal time, carrying tickets from decades past, heading toward destinations that live only in memory. The Ghost Network operates every night in cities around the world. The next time you board a late-night bus or train, look around carefully. Some of your fellow passengers might be continuing journeys that began long before you were born. Until our paths cross again in whatever reality that might be, remember that some commutes never really end, and some passengers never truly reach their final destinations. Sweet dreams and welcome to the Night Siminium, where every journey tells a story that transcends time itself.